Good morning. Happy Friday. It is raining here in the Pacific Northwest, so I hope that wherever you are getting some better weather. Hopefully you're not frozen in, but anyways, we shall get started. My name is Jessica Bawag, and if we have not met yet, I am a speech language pathologist with Fluent Children's Therapy, and today is our very first installment of our regular Facebook Live videos here on our page called Conversations About Communication. And today we will be talking about autism, and you may be thinking to yourself, my child doesn't have autism. That's okay. You may find out how common autism really is, and you may be able to share some tips with your friends or colleagues or somebody else who might have a child with autism. And a full disclaimer here, like I said, I am a speech language pathologist and former special ed teacher who's worked with a lot of kids with autism. I personally do not diagnose autism, but I work with a lot of children with autism, which is why we're talking about it today, because I can see that it's a big need that families have a lot of questions about. And sometimes because we work with really young children, and autism is best diagnosed when a child is young so that they can get the proper supports needed to see real significant improvements, we see a lot of families coming in with children who do not yet have a diagnosis of autism, but later they end up getting one. So again, just a quick, sorry, I'm getting all tangled up in my wires here. We'll just have a quick conversation about it. Feel free to drop any questions or thoughts you may have. I understand, having worked with children for over a decade now in this field of special education, that every child is unique and every child is different. So if your child has a diagnosis of autism, I will not pretend that all of these will apply to your child, but there may be some things, or you may be thinking, oh, why does my child struggle with that? And this may be a tip or a clue to kind of clue you in or put the puzzle pieces together. So hope we will get started, and let's dive right in. When it comes to autism, there are some kind of classic indicators that neuropsychologists or developmental pediatricians will look for when they are giving that diagnosis. And so we'll go over a little bit of those, and then some other areas of development that are affected that some people may not think about. So first of all, when we're thinking about autism, one of the big areas where there are often deficits or challenges is in the area of language. And I tried to put them all up here so that you can have them, but I'll be moving back and forth just so I don't get in your way. But language is a big one. And so, of course, as a speech therapist, that is where we would come in. But a lot of children with autism, whether they are 3 or 13, autism is not something that gets cured or goes away. But like I said before, there are lots of supports and strategies that we can put into place to help children improve in these areas. So language is a big one, whether it's receptive language, understanding language, expressive language, how they use language, or even other things such as language memory. How do children hear what's being spoken to them, retain it, and then be able to process it? A lot of times those areas can be affected as well. Social language, so the next big area that autism often affects is social skills. So social language, how do children, teenagers, adults with autism interact with other individuals? Whether that's starting a conversation, maintaining a conversation, transitioning topics, how do they know how far away to stand from somebody, how do they read facial expressions, all of those areas. There's a lot that goes into social interactions, and neurotypical individuals often don't think about all that goes into how we form friendships, join a conversation, express our ideas with others. So there's a lot that can be broken down and a lot that can be specifically taught for children with autism so that they can learn these strategies that may come naturally to other people. So again, language is a big area that gets affected. Social skills is another big area that gets affected. And the third area that is now being seen and recognized more recently as an area that individuals with autism have deficits in, is this area of sensory needs. And that is such a broad topic that I will just gloss over today because, again, I work with a lot of children and individuals who have sensory needs, but an occupational therapist would be better suited, especially one who is trained in sensory integration or sensory processing disorder. They would be better able to speak to real specifics on that. But I've worked with enough OTs, occupational therapists, to kind of get a sense of how to explain that. So sensory needs can run the gamut of a lot of different things. When we think of our senses, most people think of the five senses. So seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touch. And those are definitely big ones. There are also three kind of internal, well, they're all internal, but three other senses that we often forget to talk about. So things like vestibular, which is regulated by your inner ears, so how you keep your balance and how do you know where you are in space. And then there's proprioception, which is your found in your joints, and kind of, I don't really know how to explain it except for I know it's in your joints. And then there's gustatory, which is your kind of digestion system. So there are actually more than just the five senses. But when it comes to children or individuals with autism, one or many of those areas can be affected in how they take in information from their environment, how they process it within their body. And so you may see children with autism doing things like hand flapping is a pretty popular one in terms of a visible indicator. So something that people can actually see from the outside, or they may walk on their toes. And those could be ways that they're trying to either get more sensory input or they are trying to maybe escape their environment because the sensory overload is too much. Those, again, are just some examples. Not every child or individual with autism expresses their sensory needs in that way, but those are some of the more typical ones that people think of when they think of children with autism. But again, they can run the gamut of the fluorescent lights here in this room, maybe too much for them, and they don't know how to regulate their bodies in order to deal with those. Maybe they hear the little buzzing of the heater that is turned on, and that really distracts them from any other conversation or learning activity they may be involved in. So lots of different sensory needs can also be affected when it comes to autism. And then some of the other areas that I wanted to talk about today are some of the lesser known or lesser talked about areas, but are often still seen as affected. And this month on our website, fluentchildrenstherapy.com, if you head on there, we have several blog posts and articles that we've written to kind of gather some information that's out there, some research that's been done, so that you have a one kind of place to look that's clearly written out about these things as well. So feel free to go ahead and check that out. So one of them is GI problems. And so as you'll see as we talk through these, a lot of these here in the red, some of the lesser known areas that are affected, do tie in with some of these major key areas that doctors and scientists have seen that are a common thread when it comes to autism. Because when it comes to autism, it is a spectrum disorder. So not every child will present in the same way, which is why we see so many differences when it comes to autism. So when it comes to GI problems, I'm gonna just take a guess here and speculate. I haven't done my research well enough about this, but I have a feeling that it's closely linked to the sensory needs. So when it comes to GI problems, that involves like digestion, constipation, diarrhea, all of those types of things. But a lot of times we'll see individuals with autism also have some GI problems. Not every child or not every person, but many of them do. Another area that can be affected is feeding issues. So again, all of these can be linked together. As you'll see, excuse me, I'm trying to get over a cold. I know it's cold and flu season. So feeding issues can be linked to GI problems, can be linked to sensory needs. So feeding issues typically come up in the form of picky eating is kind of what we as a parent would call it. And That can, again, run a different range of things, but a lot of times they'll be very restricted in the foods that they eat, individuals with autism, or they may be resistant to trying new foods, so kind of one and the same. So a lot of the kids that we work with here, we'll hear parents say, yeah, they just won't eat their fruits and vegetables. Okay, that's pretty typical for a certain age range, but then if I dig a little deeper, really what it comes down to is they're eating a lot of the same types of foods. So they'll eat chicken nuggets, French fries, goldfish crackers, what I tend to call, and a lot of people call, the yellow diet, because all of the foods are yellow and similar in consistency and kind of bland in taste. So again, those sensory needs, when it comes to taste, can also affect feeding issues when it comes to being a picky eater and those things. So those can closely be tied together. There is a lot of good support out there and a lot of good strategies for working with picky eaters, whether your child has autism or not. Just because your child is a picky eater, it doesn't mean your child has autism. You can have a picky eater without autism. So one of the speech therapists that I love to follow, her name is Melanie. I'm going to ruin her last name, so I will say it by her website, which is My Munch Bug. But she's got some great books and resources on that, as well as Food Chaining is another great book where there's very specific strategies and really kind of practical ideas that you can try to use if your child, again, has autism or doesn't, but is facing some feeding issues when it comes to being a picky eater. So feeding is another area where children or individuals with autism can be affected. Another area is disrupted sleep. So again, if we're thinking about, again, some of these sensory needs, sleep, all of these topics are huge topics that we could spend hours talking about more specifically, and maybe in the future we will. But for now, disrupted sleep, one of the reasons, and again, I'm just taking a guess, that children with autism may be more prone to disrupted sleep is related to this sensory needs area too. So if they're not able to calm themselves down effectively, and again, things in their environment are just kind of overwhelming or very chaotic for them, if they're not able to calm themselves down internally when it's time to go to sleep, their sleep may be disrupted throughout the night. And so their body may be going through all of these different changes, and they may not be able to, as adults, as a neurotypical adult, I can sometimes feel in the middle of the night, I think I want to wake up because my stomach is grumbling, or I had a thought pop in my head. But I have learned strategies over my lifetime to calm my body down, to calm my mind down, to stay in the bed, to continue on that sleep, and get the sleep that I need in order for my body to get the rest and the recovery that it needs. But a child, especially with autism, who may be facing all of these sensory dysregulation, so everything's kind of getting mixed up and chaotic, may not be able to do that. So again, I'm not a sleep expert, but I know how important sleep is for anybody to function, especially children. They need much more sleep than adults do in order to function properly and to learn properly and to develop relations properly. So sleep is a really big thing. There are many sleep specialists out there, and I'll try to link some of them in the comments below after our video is over today. So sleep is another big area. And then the last area that I wanted to chat about today that can also be affected in individuals with autism is anxiety. And anxiety is a big deal. We're hearing about it a lot more these days. Again, just because your child has anxiety, it does not mean they have autism. But if your child has autism, then there's a high chance that they could also have some anxiety. And again, I tie anxiety in with both these sensory needs and these social skills and language, just because all of these areas can be affected. If I'm not able to understand what's going on in the world around me, from a language standpoint, so what people are saying, or I'm not picking up on all the cues, or being able to understand, mom's saying something to me, and I'm just not understanding it, or I'm not able to block out all the other distractions from the environment to hear her, that's going to kind of give me some anxiety. My blood pressure is going to raise, my heart's going to start getting anxious. And then if you follow that pattern over and over and over again without addressing these sensory needs at an underlying core, then that anxiety is just going to build on each other. And then one thing, I'm going to just take a little pause here and go off on a side note here, but if you notice, cognition and intelligence is not one of the areas that we're talking about today. And I think that's a big misconception in the information that, kind of partial information that people get, or they may see movies or TV shows and automatically assume that a child with autism means that a child is not intelligent or their cognitive skills are delayed. Don't get me wrong, sometimes they are, but that is not always a guarantee. There are many individuals with autism where their cognitive skills are where they should be for their age or above. So cognition and intelligence and IQ and things like that is not an indicator, or not really an area that researchers and doctors have found affects all individuals with autism. So I just want to put that out there. Again, the big major three that we see in most, if not all, individuals with autism are language, social skills, and sensory needs to a certain extent. But again, back to anxiety, we can also link it to social skills. So if I'm a child, a 5-year-old, and I'm wanting to play with a kid on the playground, first of all, I've got to have the desire and the motivation to do that. And then if I do, but I don't have the language skills to ask them to share the toy or join in the game, or getting too close to them is just too overwhelming for me, then I might have some anxiety because I may have a desire to seek that social bond or that social relationship, but I don't have the language skills to do it, and I'm not able to regulate my sensory needs well enough to get close in proximity to join that game or that person or whatnot. So you can see where some of this anxiety comes in. And again, I'm not a specialist in anxiety either, but I can see how all of these areas are interrelated. So bottom line is, I don't mean to paint a gloomy picture of things, but I want to give a comprehensive view, a really holistic view of autism, because it can be pretty complex in terms of how it affects our children. And so I want us to be able to get the proper support that we need from the specialists that are out there, because there is a specialist for each one of these areas. As a speech therapist, our area would primarily be language and social skills, and we could do a little bit of sensory needs here in therapy and talk to parents about it. When it comes to sensory needs, that would primarily be an occupational therapist, especially one that's trained in sensory integration, because not all of them are, but they would be a good professional to seek out. GI problems, there's GI specialists and doctors. Feeding issues could be addressed by a speech therapist who's trained in feeding. There are specific feeding therapists out there, or occupational therapists. So you've got a choice, and a lot of them work together to deal with feeding issues. Disrupted sleep, there are sleep specialists. You can talk to your pediatrician about that. Or anxiety, maybe more of a mental health professional, a psychologist, a child counselor, something along those lines. So just want to kind of talk about an overview. I know that was very quick, and again, we may be going into some of these areas more deeply in the future, but those are some of the major areas where children with autism can be affected when it comes to their development. So we want to be sure, even at as early as possible, to get them the proper supports that they may need so that they can learn to regulate their emotions, regulate those sensory needs, in order to be fully accessible to the world around them and learning new skills and meeting new people and really enjoying, having a really high quality of life. So I hope that was helpful for you. Like I said before, my name is Jessica Balog. I'm a speech language pathologist and owner here at Fluent Children's Therapy. Feel free to drop any questions or comments or thoughts in the comment section below, and I will be sure to hop back in there after I jump off this video to answer those. I will take a quick peek right now to see who is live, so give me a quick second in case there are any questions that I can help answer or discuss this morning. Give me 1 second. here I am. So it doesn't look like there's any questions today, which is no problem. I will see you guys back on next Friday next week. I hope you enjoy your weekend and see you real soon. Take care.